So I'm going to talk about the power of the status quo today. Complacency, stuck, gridlock, entrenched, same old, business as usual. Those are the words that come to mind when you hear status quo. I'm going to try to convince you in the next 7 minutes that the status quo is dynamic. It's exciting. It's powerful. And it's one of the keys to understanding how to address the challenges of our time. What are some of these challenges? A broken world order, populism. We have challenges of prosperity, challenges of inequality. How do we design the best policies? What do we mean by best, anyway? Best for who? Are we trying to grow the entire pie at the expense of some? Some might think that's the right answer. But I like a different notion of best. Something you might have heard about. It's called Pareto Efficiency. What does that even mean? Well, if I can make Francisco better off without making anyone else in this room worse off, that's a Pareto improvement. I'm after Pareto improvements. I like Pareto improvements. But what does status quo have to do with Pareto improvements? We're talking about improvements. I'm a mother of 2 children. At any point, I would never try to take a toy from my son and give it to my daughter. I simply wouldn't do that. What kind of mother would I be? I might give my son a toy and tell my daughter, just wait your turn, be patient. Status quo doesn't matter, has no bite. I'm a benevolent mother. I would never harm my children. But this is a democracy. We don't have a benevolent mother. We have to agree to anything. We have to bargain. The status quo matters when we're bargaining. So, I'm going to use my love for theory and tell you how the status quo matters for bargaining. Imagine for a moment that there are 2 people balancing on a plank. Let's call one Jack. Let's call one Jill. They're standing on this plank. They'd both prefer to go up than go down. Up is good. Down is bad. Well, if you're Jack, you're thinking your best bet is to get closer to the fulcrum. If you're Jill, you know what Jack's thinking. You better get closer to the fulcrum too. Well, unfortunately, this ends up with an equilibrium where Jack and Jill are on top of each other, right at the fulcrum. Of course, they're not going to stay like that. Jill's probably going to kick Jack off. But that's inefficient. We can do better. Quite simply. Just put 2 additional supports. Now, Jack and Jill don't have to fight anymore. These supports, that's the status quo. The status quo just got us to a better outcome for Jack and Jill. But you say, we're still here. Don't we want to go up? Well, now Jill's only option for going up is to get creative. Jill might choose to get a balloon and float away. Jack, that's okay. Under the old regime, Jack would have fallen. But with the status quo, Jack's cool. He can stay right there if he wants to. Or he can get his own balloon. He's like, oh, I like that idea. A balloon. Let me go off too. Okay. But I said it's dynamic. It helps us to move places. And I'm going to show you an example of how it helps us to move places. So let's take Jack and Jill again. Balancing on their little plank. There's another plank over here. Since they both like to go up, they both much prefer to be on that plank over there. But now, Jill's a clever girl. Jack's a clever boy too. Jill says, look at this. If I somehow jump onto that plank, I'd be great if I landed just perfectly right here. But there's this risk that I land badly and somehow end up going down. Jack makes the same calculation. They say, never mind, we won't do this. Let's instead think, what if we put the supports right here? What if we design the status quo so that if Jack and Jill choose to move, they know they're balanced. They know they're supported. Now Jack and Jill together, as a clever pair, decide, let's go with that status quo. Okay. We can design the status quo. Designing the status quo is not a new idea. The Bible talks about King Solomon. There's a famous story that you might know. Two women walk in. They have a dispute over a baby. Woman A claims the baby is hers. Woman B claims the baby's hers. But woman A has the baby in her hand. It must be hers. That's the status quo. King Solomon, in his wisdom, recognizes what the women think is the status quo. He changes the status quo. He says, I'm going to split the baby in two. He provided a worse status quo. The true mother would prefer the current status quo over the worse status quo that King Solomon is offering. He designed the status quo. He designed it so that the true mother was revealed and the outcome was better for everyone. Okay, so we can design the status quo. Why might we want to design the status quo? It's broken. It needs to be fixed. We've been talking about that for the last 2 days. We've been talking about that this morning. We'll talk about that for the rest of the day. Francisco said, I'm an economist. I'm a game theorist. Unfortunately, he's wrong. I'm a civil engineer. My first degree is in engineering from MIT. I want to fix things. I want to fix the status quo. It's broken. We can fix it. We've had the international trading regime since 1947, 72 years of a status quo that was working for a time. With each successive round of negotiations, that status quo improved. But we can all agree the current status quo is not working. It's time to fix the status quo. I have worked with Julia Raslan, Ying Chen, Jan Zapal that tells us the right way to fix the status quo is to ensure there's enough flexibility. So we will fix the status quo. What happens if we don't fix the status quo? But wait, there's one more thing. There's one more thing. Why does this all work? Who's designing the status quo? There needs to be some governance. There needs to be some leadership. But not only governance and leadership that everyone subscribes to. In this country, we have a perfect example of what this is. Any program, any spending program by the United States government that's mandated by law is a status quo. It provides a status quo that's dynamic. It leads to higher provision of public goods. But why does it work in the United States? Why doesn't it seem to work in the same way in international trading regime? We respect the laws. The law works here. We cannot improve the status quo of the international trading regime without respect for the laws. That's where it needs to begin. So I hope you'll join me in optimism that we can get to this higher place with the right design of the status quo. Thank you very much.